It is true that I did desert the eastern suburbs for the Shire some time ago, and in the true sort of spirit of migration, once you go and become part of a new place, you do find yourself become totally immersed in it. And I knew this was true when my father and I went to a rugby match down at Foreshore Park at Sylvania Waters, and the Myrtle Greens, that's about the only green thing my father does support. The Myrtle Greens were playing Southern Districts, Randwick and Southern Districts, and I found my mood and emotions going up and down with the fortunes of Southern Districts, sad to say, for those who are Randwick supporters, when Randwick was a place that I knew very well as a youngster and played in all the rugby parks around Clovelly and Coogee. So that transformation is complete, but it is really great to be back here tonight in this room, which I've been in many times before. And it's great to be here with Malcolm and with Peter. It's great to be here with Malcolm because I would not have the opportunities I have here as a Shadow Minister for Immigration if Malcolm hadn't first, when he was leader, given me the opportunity as Shadow Minister for Housing and local government. And the opportunities I've had now to work in this portfolio came as a result of the opportunity to really do that for Malcolm when he was leader. And so in many ways he's responsible for me when it comes to immigration, and for better for worse. And I think tonight is a good opportunity for me to thankfully talk about some other topics from the ones that you will normally hear me speaking about. It's also tremendous to be here with Professor MacDonald. Now, I've carefully read a lot of his work, and as a former graduate of the University of New South Wales who did his thesis under Associate Professor Ian Burnley, you might remember Ian.
I know that Ian Burnley, but I didn't do this.
No, I did.
You did.
I don't think Ian's... Yeah, anyway. This is a topic that is very close to my heart, and given the nature of this forum, and forgive me for doing this, I don't normally sort of would read a speech in a forum like this, but I actually have prepared something tonight, and it really was intended, I think, amongst effectively a Liberal audience, those who support us, I thought I very much owed it to this forum to give you a pretty sound underpinning in terms of where we're thinking about, what we're thinking about when it comes to immigration policy, why we think of it in the way we do, and particularly in the areas of the overall size of the migration program and its composition. But there is a genuine, I think, philosophical underpinning to our approach, and the United States and Australia are the two most successful immigrant nations on earth, and that success, I believe, is represented in the extraordinary level of cohesion that exists in proportion to the broad diversity of ethnic, national, religious, racial and language origins of our citizen and resident population. Now, this success has been very, very hard won, and it has not been without failure along the way, and indeed the consequences of failures that we've had are very much felt for generations. You can't get immigration wrong and not suffer those consequences for some period of time. That's why it's important to be so cautious in our approach. And it's important to understand why we've been so successful, I think, as an immigrant nation. For both the United States and ourselves, our success can be traced, I think, to some important principles. And I believe they were best expressed by President Teddy Roosevelt more than 100 years ago in his first State of the Union address, when he said, "We need every honest and efficient immigrant fitted to become an American citizen." Now, you can obviously transpose American with Australian here, and I think that very much applies to us. He understood that immigration was a nation-building initiative. It wasn't a welfare program. He believed that national greatness was dependent upon the capacity and character of the individual citizen to make a contribution. Now, in my view, that is probably the most important of all Liberal conservative values. He saw immigration as the vehicle to recruit and build a great nation and enhance the national interest. He proposed that immigration should be selective and subject to a threefold test, and this was in that State of Union address back in 1901. Firstly, a character test that addressed not only issues of national security, but ensured that immigrants were not, as he said, of low moral tendency or of unsavoury reputation. Secondly, he said a civics test to ensure that there was an intelligent capacity to appreciate American institutions and act sanely as American citizens. Thirdly, he proposed an economic test, requiring a certain standard of economic fitness with proper proof of personal capacity to earn an American living and enough money to ensure a decent start under American conditions. Now, while Roosevelt believed strongly in selection, he did not believe in discrimination. In 1907 he said, "If the immigrant who comes here in good faith becomes an American, he shall be treated on exactly equality with everyone else, for it is an outrage to discriminate against any such man because of creed or birthplace or origin." He also believed that as a host nation there was an obligation to support immigrants to become good citizens. And he said in his later years, "We must in every way possible encourage the immigrant to rise, help him up, give him a chance to help himself. If we try to carry him, he may well prove not well worth the carrying. We must insist upon his showing the same standard of fealty to this country and to join with us in raising the level of our common American citizenship." Now, he understood and believed that the success of an immigration program would ultimately be measured in the calibre of the citizens it produced, and that such citizenship could not be ambiguous. He spoke of the need for there to be no divided allegiance. He said, "We have room but for one flag, but one language, and but one sole loyalty, and that is loyalty to the American people." Now, the principles of non-discriminatory immigration policy, where selection is based on character and appreciation of the values and institutions of the host nation and the ability to contribute, these have all driven liberal immigration policy from Menzies to Abbott and all in between. Like Roosevelt, our aim has always been to make good citizens, and I think we've had extraordinary success. Last year, the Centre for Independent Studies produced a policy monograph as part of their Population and Growth series. The paper argues that Australia's selective migration system is the driving cause for Australia's success as one of the world's most culturally diverse nations. They observed that Australia predominantly received migrants who were qualified and capable of easily integrating into society, and that Australia has been cherry-picking, their words, the best qualified migrants most likely to make a positive contribution. Now, they argue that Germany and the United Kingdom did not follow our planned migration path and have paid a very heavy price in social dislocation as a result. Their paper cites an article in the American Sociological Review into the effects of policies regulating immigration in both Australia and New Zealand, another great immigration nation, which found that the relatively high educational and occupational status of the immigrants' parents fully explains, this was a quantitative study, fully explains the better educational performance of immigrant children, and that our analyses, quoting themselves, do not support the hypothesis that the better performance of immigrant children in traditional immigration countries can be explained by a more receptive attitude towards immigrants in these countries. Now, this performance in Australia, I think, is mirrored in more recent research done for the Department of Immigration and Citizenship, which shows that unemployment in 2010-11 was lower for all migrant males, regardless of their background, than Australian-born males in the labour market, and for migrant females from mainly English-speaking countries than Australian-born females, and for the labour force more generally. Migrants also had higher rates of tertiary education attainment and were overrepresented in professional, in management occupations. Now, the reverse is true in the United Kingdom and in Germany. The CIS authors concluded by saying, if Australia wants to continue the process of attracting migrants into the future, it should not deviate from the policy of selecting migrants based on their suitability. Migrants can only add value to recipient countries if they fit in and make an effort to integrate. Immigration nations ignored this basic insight at their peril. Now, I agree with these sentiments, and I raise this because it is important for us to understand why we have become so successful as an immigrant country, bringing together people from so many different backgrounds. We need to be mindful of the reasons for that success if we want to continue it, and that's certainly something I do want to see continue. We must not also develop policy that seeks to address the problems that, by comparison, we don't have in relation to other countries. And while I might empathise with Angela Merkel and David Cameron as they battle with the complex issues of immigration in a European context, their immigration practice has followed a very different path to Australia, and likewise, our response should not be designed to address their problems. Our response should be different. So what are our challenges? This evening I want to focus on two things: the size of our program and the composition of that program. And my starting point is that population growth is good when managed well. We support it. Australia's population growth rate is currently 1.4% per annum, and that's consistent with our long-run average. And by global standards, Australia does not have a slow rate of population growth. It is the same as India. It's 0.3 percentage points higher than the global average of 1.1. It's almost double the OECD average of 0.8% and higher than other comparable Western countries, including the UK at 0.6, Canada at 1% and the United States at 0.9. Immigration accounts for more than half of our annual population growth, and it is the most volatile component of that growth. And it's the component over which the federal government, and federal government policy in particular, has the greatest influence in terms of our population growth. Immigration policy, therefore, must form part of any serious national population policy. The government has steadfastly refused to acknowledge this link, I believe, and has sought to quarantine immigration policy from the population debate. This doesn't mean that population policy, though, is all about immigration. To the contrary, immigration is the input. The outcome is about maintaining and improving our quality of life. To achieve this, we must ensure a balance between our capacity to support and absorb population growth with our capacity, and I stress our necessity, to generate such growth. Now, Professor McDonald and Jeremy Temple put together a paper called Immigration, Labour Supply and Per Capita Gross Domestic Product, Australia 2010 to 2050. And this was done for the Department of Immigration and Citizenship, I understand. Now, this is, I think, an outstanding paper, and I'm sure he may remark on it a little later. But I do believe it summarises the challenges of sustainable population growth and the role of immigration well. It observes that migration has a meaningful impact on the rate of growth per capita of GDP, and that the impact of immigration on population ageing, and hence upon the rate of growth per capita GDP, gets smaller as the migration level increases. There can also be no doubting the fiscal contribution of immigration, in particular skilled migration. Access Economics has done some work for the department which shows of the 182,000 people that came through our permanent program in 2010-11, their net fiscal contribution to Australia over their first 3 years will be $2.4 billion. That's their net contribution, not their gross, with an average contribution of around $13,500 for each of those people under that program. Now, permanent skilled migrants generate on average a lot more than the average migrant coming under the program. Their contribution is around $22,000 each, while those who came under 457s, and there was around 90,000 of those, their contribution over the next 3 years from their time of arrival was $2.2 billion. And that's an average of more than $27,000 each. Now, that's in comparison to the family program, where the contribution is around just under $6,000, and the humanitarian and refugee program actually comes at a net cost of, for 13,770 people who came under the program, there was an estimated cost of $380 million, or $27,500 each. Now, the migration must be supported by increasing our capacity to support and absorb growth. And that means, as Professor McDonald and Mr Temple noted in the paper, that without investment in infrastructure, new forms of energy and the reversal of environmental degradation, Australia's capacity to take full advantage of opportunities is threatened. And if increased migration proceeds without investment in new infrastructure, especially urban infrastructure, the result could be reductions in productivity through increased congestions and inefficiency. And therefore a plan relating to Australia's future levels of immigration must be coordinated with policy for urban infrastructure, especially housing, transport